Hi everyone, my name is Nikki. I am a volunteer with Come Collective, and Come Collective is a mental health startup that is aiming to normalize mental health conversations in Asia and break the stigma. So just a little bit of background into the talk itself. So we decided to do a dating with mental health condition talk that is kind of along in the same week of Valentine's Day. It's a special edition. And yeah, generally dating can be very, very tricky, especially in the modern dating scene, right? With the advent of dating apps, your Tinders. Recently there was a Netflix #1 that is the Tinder Swindler, which is basically this guy who like cheated multiple girls of like tens to hundreds of thousands of dollars all over the world. And yeah, it was crazy. So like dating is crazy in itself, and then we add this added layer of complexity of mental health into it, and then it becomes a lot more difficult or challenging, and we're here to figure out how we can better navigate that. So together with me, we have two panelists, Mahima and Eugene. Yeah, maybe I can just start off with a little bit of background. So I volunteer at Come Collective, and I live with bipolar 2 disorder, which is a less severe version of bipolar 1, but it's characterized by one hypomanic episode in your life, and you're hit by depressive episodes along the way as well. So, fluctuating mood states, fluctuating, sleep, as well as behaviors and energy levels as well. And for me, definitely, my mental health has played a huge role in dating, in relationships, ever since I was diagnosed about 5 years back in 2018. So I've been living with it for a while now. And so this talk is actually very, very special to me. I think there's a bit of a selfish agenda to it, to hosting it, because I think there's so much that we can learn from the panelists' experience here today. So we have Mahima, who is a clinical psychologist at Thrive Family, and we also have Eugene Ling, who is a mental health advocate who has lived experience with anxiety and is currently in a relationship. So maybe we can go into a round of introductions. Mahima, maybe you can start us off. Maybe you can share a little bit about your area of specialty, what kind of therapy do you do, and what kind of clients do you typically see?
Hi, everyone. I'm Mahima. Really honored to be here because I think this is such an important and relevant topic, which is affected by and then in turn affects mental health. So I'm a clinical psychologist. I'm working with teenagers and adults in kind of individual and couple setups. My main area of focus is trauma and anxiety. And I work kind of across the spectrum from personality disorders to depression, relationship issues, and eating disorders and the like. And kind of, I've been working for over a decade and been in Singapore for a while now. So that's what I do. I'm happy to be part of this talk.
Thanks very much, Mahima. Definitely, your experience is going to come in really handy. It's very, very valuable, especially in this talk. Definitely want to delve into, I guess, childhood trauma, how this affects, dating patterns, attachment styles, the people that we seek out in terms of the people that we're attracted to and stuff. And that's definitely going to be very, very interesting to dive into. So thank you for that. And maybe I'll jump to Eugene. So maybe Eugene, you can share a little bit about your journey with mental health as well as your dating life as well.
Oh, hi everyone. So interestingly, what Mahima specializes in, I think I seem to have experienced quite a few of them. So I think it's very relevant as well. I've been going to therapy for about 2 years now, and I'm starting to get out of it. And I think I'll be happy to share more of my stories and kind of be here to, share my experience and my journey with everyone.
Thank you. Thanks very much, Eugene. Yeah, and just a little bit of info. We originally had Jufri who was going to join us as one of our panelists, but Eugene has very kindly stepped in, and we're really very excited to have him because he has a very interesting story, I hear. So I'm very, very excited to get into it with the two of you. So yeah, maybe we can start with like the easier questions first, right? So maybe we can go into what are some of the typical challenges when dating with a mental health condition. Mahima, maybe you can start us off. So what are some of the typical questions that you might get from your clients about dating? And do you see different patterns or different questions when it comes to people without mental health conditions and people with mental health conditions? Are the questions different? Are the challenges different? Are there similarities? Maybe you can share a little bit. And also, are there specific conditions that make dating harder? Maybe you can share.
That's a bit of a broad question. So I'm going to try to tackle that in different sections. Okay. So some of the concerns that perhaps people with mental health conditions have on top of or in addition to people who don't have that are things like stigma, things like will the other person truly be able to understand them and accept them for who they are? Will they be able to handle them? Many of these people feel that they can be a bit much, or that their experiences are really very different from others who, they would call normal, even though that there's no thing like that. But it's like, they won't get how it is. So there are these added layers of fears and insecurities, and it is often also tied in to what you're struggling with. Like if you're already having anxiety, you're likely to be even more anxious about dating. If you're struggling with depression, that can kind of play into how much energy and motivation or what kind of optimism you have or not about dating possibilities. So it's kind of an interplay of what leads to it and what feeds into it. And, it's a chicken and egg thing there that kind of ends up in a loop over there. And dating, as you already started with, it's difficult enough and messy enough as it is. So most people would kind of have their own concerns and struggles and anxieties about it anyway. But people with mental health conditions, like with other things, their experiences can be more intense. They can have more of backstories and more of trauma and more of negative experiences or expectations linked to it, making it more difficult. Their coping strategies or the ways that they react to conflict or relationship breakups, etc., can be different than others who have stronger support systems and stronger coping strategies. So kind of that changes the landscape of how it is experienced. And in terms of certain mental health conditions kind of making it tougher, so one is the category. So what we call a personality disorder or a personality type, which are basically long-standing patterns of how we relate to other people and how we relate to ourselves. Those can often be more difficult because they're more pervasive, they're more long-standing, they're more difficult to shift. Whereas things like depression and anxiety, they can be difficult in different ways because they're episodic, that they're here and then they're not here. And then, of course, with mental health conditions, the severity is really, really different. So someone with a mild depressive episode here and there versus someone with major clinical depression, the presentation would be very different, and the difficulties would be very different. So each person is unique, but anyone with kind of specific difficulties coming from childhood trauma, from attachment styles, from things which are less chemical in a way and almost more interpersonal, right? That can, I think, be difficult in a different way. I hope that answers some of the aspects of what you were looking at.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks very much, Mahima. I think you touched on something that was really, really important, which is that it's not a strict one-way relationship, right? That is, your mental health affects your dating. But similarly as well, if you have a mental health condition or generally as a human being, right? your dating life can also affect your mental health, because the person that you're seeing or the person that you're dating probably is one of the most important people in your life, and therefore has that power or has that impact on you, on your emotions, on your moods, and also I guess your stability, and your mental health. And so there's that whole like dynamic circular relationship that also feeds into each other. And I think that's something that we want to I guess dive into a little bit more, because it's so complex, and we want to unpack some of these things over the course of this session. So maybe Eugene, you can share a little bit about your own personal experience. Mahima did talk about a few challenges that some of the people, some of her clients with, say, anxiety or depression face, some of the concerns that they have when it comes to dating, whether the partner will feel like they are too much, whether they're being a burden to the other person. Do you also struggle with these kinds of sentiments? And maybe you can share a little bit about how your anxiety or your mental health has also played a part in your dating.
Oh, cool. Yeah, happy to share. So I think what you pointed it out very correctly, which is it being a vicious cycle, a loop. So sometimes when you get triggered by something, if there's a certain trigger, it goes into a spiral. So sometimes when the spiral, you go into this fight or flight response, or what they call the amygdala hijack. And usually I would take the flight approach and always try to leave the relationship, or have suicidal thoughts. And if you don't keep it in check, actually it escalates pretty quickly, and it affects everyone around you also. So I think that's kind of the experience I've been having. And should I talk about it more, or maybe?
Yes, please. You can share. Continue sharing if you like.
I think maybe you can talk about the solutions later, I guess. I think what's interesting is really, you might not even identify that at first. So like going to therapy and all that helps, to identify these negative thinking patterns, and so that it does not escalate to something even worse, right? Like your escapist tendencies. So I think Mahima pointed it out correctly. So there's a tendency to find different coping mechanisms, to isolate yourself. Some people might abuse alcohol, that kind of thing. And being cognizant of your potential behavior like that is very helpful. And knowing when to stop yourself from doing that, I think that's important too. So I think at the start when I was trying to do it, was very tough for me, because it was even being aware and validating those feelings were very painful. But as you got more comfortable with it, I think you know that it's not end of the world. So I think it really takes time to practice and be aware of that.
Thanks so much, Eugene. Yeah, I totally agree. I think prior to my own journey in inner child therapy, which I started recently, I realized that there were a lot of blind spots as well in how I was reacting, in how I was behaving, in I guess the people that I was attracting or I was attracted to as well. And I think growing in awareness of what makes me tick, what makes me annoyed, what triggers me, and also being aware of how I behave and what my coping tendencies are. For me, it is shut down. So similar to you, flight response is really like shut down. The moment something triggers me, I'm not going to talk. I'm just going to be like quiet throughout and just going to make everything awkward for everybody with silence. But realizing how I behave and why I behave that way, I think it has been very useful. And I think exactly what you said, awareness is so important when it comes to mental health. And even with people who don't struggle with mental health, there are other things that will come up in relationships, in dating as well, like certain things that they do, certain ways that they react and interact with people, even without the added complexity of a mental health condition. And it's having that awareness that is so useful and so important. Eugene, maybe you can share a little bit about how your dating life has been prior to that awareness of your anxiety, or going through that therapy journey. Were there things that you did or ways that your anxiety manifested that you didn't really understand, and that you just that was just perpetuated because of this lack of awareness?
Oh yeah, I can start with that. Yeah, I think socially I was all over the place. Just going out a lot, partying a lot, and very interestingly, you just find it hard to really commit to anyone properly, and your attachment style seems to be either fluctuating between something really insecure to something really avoidant, you know. So I think that was a lot of ups and downs for me during the period. And I think what was interesting was because I think one interesting thing was I kind of isolated myself emotionally and tried to escape a lot with different coping mechanisms. So that was a very dark path because you have no one but yourself. You might think that you don't deserve to be loved. You know, you think that something bad is going to happen every day and the worst is always going to come. And that was this constant like fear that I lived in. So maybe I can talk a bit more about my journey as well and how I opened up to therapy. So I think one night I was in New York and was partying quite hard. And the next day, someone came to me, she contacted me and gave me this journal. Inside, she wrote this note saying that, you know, you actually told me a lot about your life story. And I encourage you when you go back to Singapore to go for therapy. And that's what I did. So I think the point I'm trying to make here is that I finally opened up that night while I was like super drunk. And because of that, someone was there to help me and guide me in my journey. And we are not in contact anymore, but I think at that point in time we just met and she kind of changed that. So I think that was a very interesting path that I was on 2 years ago.
Oh, that's very fascinating how like a stranger one night could have had such a huge impact on your life and completely change the direction of your life. Eugene, you mentioned a lot about attachment styles. Maybe Mahima, you can, I guess, give like a little bit of like the layperson definition of attachment styles for people, for the audience that's listening here. Maybe you can share a little bit about the different attachment styles and how they play out in our dating life.
So, an attachment style basically is how we connect, how we love, how we get attached to another person, to another significant person in our life. And that's not necessarily only a romantic partner. It is your best friend, it is your children, it is your parents, it is kind of anyone who's important to you. And how do you do that? And that's something that's formed in childhood and often early childhood. So there is this, without going too much into the science and the technicalities of it, there is some debate between nature and nurture, but definitely nurture plays a very, very significant role. So how you were parented, how kind of the bonds that you saw between your parents, their relationship with each other, their relationship with you, and kind of your immediate caregivers around you. That is basically how you are learning as a child, as a baby, of how relationships work, whether people can be trusted or not, whether they will be there for you or not, whether your needs matter or not, all of that. And that's kind of becoming the blueprint. That's becoming the basis of how you understand yourself and your relationship. And a lot of this, if not all of it, is unconscious. It's pre-verbal. So it's kind of, it's there in the background, but you don't necessarily know it. And it's just something that acts itself out as you grow older and start forming your own attachments and your own relationships. So interestingly, even though as we might have grown older and if we come from difficult backgrounds where we've seen state conflict or where we've seen people having unhealthy coping mechanisms, etc., and we kind of vow to ourselves that I will never be that and I will never do that. People often find that, that later in life, they're like, wow, I've turned into my mother, or that's just exactly how my father would say that. It's because all of this is kind of, it's a part of your subconscious mind. It's playing in the background and you don't even know it, but that's kind of your default. But having said that, it's not unchangeable, but it is something that requires awareness and work. So how it would show up, there are different kinds of attachment styles. I don't know if I remember each of them right now, but for example, the insecure attachment style would be where the person is constantly feeling that they'll be left, that they can't fully trust this person. And this insecurely attached person might end up being too clingy. They might want to kind of hold on too closely. They might have trouble trusting. They might be suspicious and paranoid. Or they might be kind of overly indulgent just to make sure that you don't leave them. But there is this deep belief at the end of the day that, you know, I am not worthy of love. And this person will figure that out and leave me, right? Then there can be the avoidant attachment style, where again, you know, there is somewhere that, so often, interestingly, the common core beliefs that come up are, I'm not worthy of love. You know, I'm not good enough. And that shows up in many different ways for different people. So an avoidant attachment style, that person would end up having this wall anyways. And we've all had that, right? We've all had friends or people we know that it's so difficult to open up because there's this wall that they are protecting themselves behind, right? So there's avoidance. So they won't truly get close. They won't truly be vulnerable because there is this inherent expectation that if I allow myself to be vulnerable, I'll get hurt, right? So they don't truly allow themselves to connect. And that ends up making them feel isolated anyway. So it becomes kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy, as we call it. What we are most scared of, we end up making that happen in our lives by our choices and decisions as well, right? Then there is the ambivalent attachment style, which kind of fluctuates. So this person might want to really hold you close one moment and then push you away the next moment. And you might not know what's going on, like which trigger, which button are you pushing right now? And even they don't know what's going on. It's different fears and different emotions playing up. So what we're looking at gradually developing kind of the gold idea that we want. Then there's the anxious attachment style and etc. There's a lot of detail out there. I don't want to So there's the secure attachment style is basically what we are hoping and looking to develop over time. So ideally we get some of that in our childhood at least, but obviously our childhood circumstances are not something that we can control. But as we do grow up and we have the opportunity for awareness, for change, for reflection, we can still build this sense of inner security, where there is that inner faith and belief that who I am as a person is worthy, is deserving of love, and is good enough. And you are capable of interacting and connecting with a person in a healthy manner, which is not overly dependent, which is not overly avoidant. You are not enmeshed that you lose your identity, and you are not blocked off from a wall either, where you can handle conflict without going into fears of abandonment, where basically, you know, you can hold strong to your sense of identity, your sense of worth, while you connect with each other on your strengths as well and can support in each other's weakness. So that's something that we aspire to grow into. And the more we develop that within ourselves and are able to form those attachments, that comes from the foundation of healthy interpersonal relationships.
Thanks very much for that crash course. It's definitely very useful for you to share and to break down the different attachment styles. Definitely, for me personally, realizing how childhood has played such a huge factor in how what are my dating patterns and stuff. So for example, there are a few things that you touched on that I really relate to, which is the concept of feeling like you're not worthy of love, or feeling like you're too much for another person, or not enough at the same time, not enough as well. And that also traces back to childhood, right? Where maybe I'll just share a little bit, which is that in my family, like I felt a little bit like my parents' marriage was very rocky, and I kind of felt like I had to play that role of a fixer. And I guess people call it parentification, where sometimes I'll have to step in, mediate. My parents wouldn't be able to regulate their own emotions, so self-regulation was a problem for them, and therefore became like my job was to regulate their emotions, and I never learned how to regulate my own emotions, right? And then as I grew up, always being fearful of the fact that like if I played this role, fixer role, wrongly, if I made any mistake, if my parents are not happy, then that's a reflection of my self-worth. And that, I guess, that fed into this very strong fear of abandonment. And definitely, I relate a lot to what you said about the self-fulfilling prophecy, which is that, the thing that you're most scared of tends to be the thing that happens just because you're so fixated on it, right? And for me, it's really the idea of that, like, everybody will leave at the end. And so there's a lot of self-sabotaging tendencies that I have in my relation that manifests in dating, where I would want to leave the person before the person leaves me. And so these are some of the things that are actively coming up now in my inner child therapy work. And realizing this and being aware of this is like what Eugene, you mentioned, when you first start getting into it and you start becoming aware of it, it's very, very painful. And there was a lot of resentment actually that I felt towards my parents, because when I learned about this, and when I learned about why a lot of my relationships were not working out, was actually a function of my childhood actually playing out in my adult life, and me never having the coping mechanisms, and never being taught how to deal with that at a young age, when I was supposed to be taught that by my parents. It caused a lot of resentment, but then also over time I realized that this generation that we're in is actually a very blessed generation, in that we have this access to all of these mental health channels, avenues to work on our mental health. Therapy is so destigmatized in our society these days, whereas for our parents it was such a huge stigma. And over time I realized that how my parents were dealing with me and how they were interacting with me was also a function of their own childhood trauma, like playing out in their own life and in their adult life. And so yeah, I totally relate to whatever you said, Mahima and Eugene, about the awareness being very, very important, obviously being that first step. And then after the awareness happens, then what is it next that you do? So Eugene, based on what Mahima shared about attachment styles and family, would you be able to share a little bit about I guess your own attachment style, or how family or potentially things that happen in your childhood actually affected you in your adult life and affected you in your dating life?
Okay, yeah, happy to share that. So I can start with my childhood. So when my therapist mapped out my life journey, and she said my life stresses started coming in around 8 years old. So it goes way back when it was a 97 financial crisis, and a lot of things happening to families. And my dad left town for a while, for a couple of years, and I think during that period I thought it was okay that he wasn't around, but I think a couple of years later, when I was like 10 or 11 years old, things started showing up. I started flaring up every now and then. I had no idea, and this went on all the way until I was like 21. I had no idea. I was just going on like as a very angry kid, right? Then after that, I got married at a very young age. I had a kid at a very young age, even before I was 22 years old. So until then, I was going through a very rocky marriage during my 20s. So basically, I spent my life going through quite a bit of stress, unknowingly, from 8 all the way until 2 years ago, which was around my 30 years old. So I think throughout this whole period, I had no idea what was going on, and I was just, in general, when it came to relationships, I was either very avoidant or very insecure. So I was kind of bouncing in between. So with certain people, I'll be super codependent. I'll always go out my way to give to people in relationships, or sometimes when other people that I might date, I might be really avoidant. I'll be really closed up and afraid to trust them, because maybe by being vulnerable, they might judge me for who I am, or they might leave me eventually. So it was kind of a polarizing kind of a behavior, so sometimes with different people. So maybe Mahima could shed some light on that, because it's only more recently then I started like realizing these things.
Thanks, Eugene. Yeah, maybe Mahima, you can share a little bit about what Eugene spoke about. I think he mentioned how he switched from different attachment styles based on the person that he was dating. Does that also affect our attachment style, and how does the traits of the person that we're dating actually affect us and how we present ourselves in our dating lives?
I think it does matter. It may not be a completely different picture. So like Eugene, what you're describing is what we call a little more ambivalent attachment style, because it tends to kind of move between different things based on the situation or the person that you're interacting with. But either way, the whole point is that it's a relationship. It's not just about that one person, right? It is about how you connect with each other, how you set each other off, you know, which are the specific buttons that you are pushing for him or her, and, you know, what are they pushing for you? So that will really impact. Like, for example, if this is a person who is really nurturing, knows how to say the right things, knows how to be there for you in the right way, you might feel like, oh my God, this is the only person who will ever be there for me. Or maybe if this person is in some way similar, I don't want to go into the kind of stereotypical representations, but just for representation, maybe this person is some way similar to your mom, who's your primary attachment figure. And we're like, you know, okay, I can't lose this person. This is my person, and you might end up getting almost dependent or clingy. Whereas there might be another person who reminds you of someone who has been more standoffish, like for Eugene, I don't know, someone who's been more like your father, who left or absent, and, you know, there might be a little more distance that comes over there. So sometimes it is about who they remind us of, and sometimes it's about just what particular insecurities they bring up. Like sometimes if maybe they're being too intense, maybe they're being too kind of demanding to let you, to let them in before you're ready, and you end up pushing them further and further away. So it is definitely an interplay, because the same person with the same attachment style or mental health condition will have different relationships with different people. So for example, they might be anxious in most of their relationships, but what exactly that looks like, how bad it gets, how they cope with it, how much it affects them will be different based on that interplay. So it is not just about one person in the relationship. Absolutely, who you are with does affect. And interestingly, a lot of times, people with mental health conditions, especially the more kind of serious ones, also have partners with their own mental health conditions. So that's kind of a very interesting interplay that often comes along of how they are making some things better and making some things worse for each other because of this interplay.
Thanks very much, Mahima. I think what you shared was really is really very, very dynamic, right? Human beings are so complex, and there's no one way that we interact with everybody, right? And it really depends on so many different factors. Someone could be triggering a response or memory from way back when, or reminding us of someone from childhood, you know, and that could affect the way that we are in a specific relationship, whether it's dating or whether it's, you know, with our friends or with other loved ones. And I guess that dynamism is very, very important. And I guess with that awareness and also communication then becomes super important as well. So I guess on the topic of communication, which Eugene did mention a little bit, you did say that you are afraid sometimes of whether the other person will judge you for who you are. This has been like the biggest question for a lot of people with mental health conditions, and let's try to unpack this question. Is there a right way of disclosing your mental health condition to someone you're dating, newly dating, right? And is there a right way, and is there a right time to do it? So there's two schools of thoughts, and so one side would be like, okay, we're just gonna word vomit everything, take it or leave it. This is me, and if you leave earlier, then I guess less time is lost and less emotions and less investment. Whereas there's the other school of thought, which is that, you know, relationships and dating is like peeling off layers of an onion, right? And getting to know a person better and on a more intimate level as well. And when there's that trust that's built and that safety, then you feel comfortable to share more things about yourself. So Mahima, is that like a magic trick that you can share with us that you think?
Sorry to give the expected answer, but no.
Of course.
This is also something that's very, very individual. Like you see it depends a little bit on who you are, your personality, where you are at in your own journey with your mental health, right? Like you'll have people who have their Twitter handle saying, mentioning their mental health condition. And that's how much kind of they've owned it, and they want to make the choice of putting that out there and starting those conversations. And there are other people who take years and years before they would share something which feels so private and so personal to them. So there is no right and wrong as such. It is about what feels right for you, what feels comfortable for you. There is no textbook on kind of, at date 5.5, you have to say X, Y, Z things, right? Of course, you don't wait till you get married and have kids to reveal something significant. When you do, whether that's in the beginning, whether that's somewhere in the middle, what I would say is it's important to go in prepared. That you're not doing something in the heat of the moment where you're not necessarily communicating it in the right way, where it's more reactionary. So prepare for that conversation, prepare for what actual data you're going to share to help them best understand. Both in terms of, say, if I have to share that, okay, actually I have a tendency towards depression. So what does that mean? Because thankfully there is much more mental health awareness now, but still there's just so much that is misconstrued or misunderstood, or just, there's a lack of awareness. So help them out over there. Don't assume that they know and they'll get it, right? So go in with data of what does depression mean? What does it look like to me? What are my symptoms like? What are my triggers like? How could it show up in our relationship? What is it that we could do which would be helpful or not? And give them time to process it. Because some people, again, depending on how plugged in they are with mental health, they'd be like, yeah, okay, I get it. I've seen it with other friends. Most people would have. The truth is mental health conditions are so prevalent. The likelihood is that whether you know it or not, you know people who are struggling with it. So, give them time to process it. For someone, it might come as a shock. For someone, they might take it in their stride. But please, just like you've taken time to understand it and come to peace with it and know how to manage it, give your partner also some time to do that. And because I think when will really depend on who you are and what that particular relationship is. Because even just general trusting someone looks so different. For some people, it's, in the second conversation, and for some people, it's not till 3 years later. So this is a part of trust, and it requires some trust to be able to do it in the first place as well for most people. So, yeah.
I really love that response, because you share about how it is about gathering that data, right? How does your mental health condition look like for you, right? Like, how do your symptoms manifest in your life? What does it look like? How does it help? What are your triggers? And how can the other person be supportive as well? And being able to openly communicate that comes from a place of a lot of awareness of your own self. And you would have had to have done that work and made that journey already, and being able to educate your partner. I love how you mentioned how it takes a lot of time for you to get to that place of awareness as well. So with your partner, it would take them some time to process, and being patient with them with the process, giving them some time to slowly unpack that and figure out whether this is something that they can deal with and they can love you and support you through as well is very important. So hopefully that answers one of the questions in the Q&A box, which is could you guys share more about how you could open up to our partner about our mental health and us going to therapy? And for some of us, assuring our partner we're okay and we're just letting them know, because some people are not as aware about mental health and therapy, so they might think it's very serious. Yeah, I guess that is very true, right? That sometimes there is this preconceived notion that, oh, everything's on fire, this person is extremely volatile, right? This person has shared this secret, and now like your whole impression of this person has changed. But actually, this person is still the person that you know and that you have come to love, right? Or have developed a certain level of feelings for. And this is just one extra layer to it. And I think it's also important for partners to understand that, yeah, the condition doesn't define the person, right? We're so much more than that as well, and we are human beings with hobbies, with pastimes, with things that we love, with things that irritate us as well, and these are completely normal behaviors as well. Eugene, maybe you can speak to this a little bit. Maybe you can share your experience of how you open up to your current partner and how your partner has also, I guess, received this information and supported you through your journey.
Oh yeah, I think also before I start with that, I would share that my personal preference would be option one, because also partly because for me it's also accepting who I am and what I have, and like telling myself that I have this anxiety, and I think that helps me in my journey, right? Rather than sometimes when I try to, let's say, not discuss it with people, it feels like I might not be worthy of love, might not be worthy of anybody's validation, attention, or whatever you call that. And it really does help. I notice with some people when I don't talk to them so much, and when I slowly open up, they'll be like, "Oh, I didn't know you have this." So, and that actually triggers a negative thinking pattern for me, because I'm like, "Oh, are you judging me or what?" So I usually prefer that option. I'll just say outright about me going to therapy, me having anxiety, and you'll be surprised. Like there'll be a lot of people who are very accepting and will be there for you, and they are actually non-judgmental. And even if they are, maybe they are not the right friends or the partner for you in that case, right? Because sometimes it's just not a good fit. So I think back to your question about, sorry, I forgot about question already.
How do you go about disclosing your mental health journey with your partner, and how did your partner receive this information and also support you through it?
I think I started going for therapy first. So we were friends from the get-go. I was always very upfront about the therapy. I would share everything, absolutely everything, even sometimes the details of the conversations with my therapist, just to be really open and to share my journey. So I think keeping my partner in the loop really helps, because she will see my progress. She'll see that I'm really trying to do something about it, and not, and really trying to accept it, right? And like being self-aware. I think that helps. My partner likes that. She likes people who are self-aware. So I think knowing and acknowledging my feelings goes a longer way and helps us bond together more. So I think the other bad thing is sometimes when I have a really bad episode or a really bad day, sometimes being too open might be challenging for them too, especially if they're very busy people. So I think sometimes learning how to, knowing when to take care of yourself and find other outlets apart from your partner, that's usually helpful for me. So I obviously at the start I was too dependent, and I will see her as an emotional crutch. I would seek validation and comfort from her all the time, and that was terrible. That was very hard for her, very draining for her. And I think I've learned to find more outlets along the way by talking to more friends, saying yes to more plans from friends, or like just learning to take care of yourself a bit more. So for example, when I'm having a long day, I'll just do something I really want to do for myself. Or if I want to play a game, I'll just play a game. And that actually helps the relationship, because now maybe you have more things to share as a person, you have more interesting things to say, and she'll be more interested in you also. So I think that's one of the learnings I had like in the last 2 years.
Thanks very much for sharing so openly, and really glad that you guys found your groove, and you guys found what works for your relationship. And I think what you mentioned about being an emotional crutch, the partner being an emotional crutch, I think that tends to be something that happens quite often in relationships, right? And Mahima, maybe you can speak a bit to this, that people with mental health conditions maybe open up to only one or two people in their lives. And then with that, there is this whole pressure that they put on the person that they're dating to be their only support system. And when you don't, I guess, diversify or like have other support pillars in your life, then that could be put a lot of pressure firstly on the relationship. And I think also the other thing is definitely, I mean, if something bad happens, the relationship breaks or the relationship ends, between the things between you two, and you're going to spiral, definitely, especially with someone with a mental health condition, right? And then if you add on top of that the fact that this person was your only support pillar, then it's a double whammy, because firstly your mental health is getting impacted, and then you don't have anyone to support you, and there is that danger. So Mahima, how would you I guess advise people with mental health conditions about relying on their partner to support them through mental health, and how would you best advise to have that balance between sharing a little bit and being vulnerable with the person that you love, but also I guess being strong enough, or having a strong enough support pillar outside of that person, so that not all the pressures on that one person.
I think Eugene kind of has touched on that quite nicely. So this is actually a problem for many relationships where you're almost over-invested in each other. Your partner is your lover, they're your best friend, they are your sibling, they are your parents, they are your child, they're your everything. So this one person is almost your whole and soul, and that's too much pressure for any one relationship to handle, even generally. And now you throw mental health into that mix, and things can be more intense, and things can go in directions which are a little bit more difficult to understand or handle than other situations, right? So which can make it tougher. So the solution, or kind of what you work towards, is really quite similar to what any one of us should do, that our relationships should be interdependent, not dependent and codependent. So you need to find that line where I can connect with you without fusing with you, without feeling like my existence, my survival, my happiness, my worth depends on you. So because that shifts from being something that's supportive to something that actually makes you feel like you can't do things by yourself. So you need relationships, you build relationships which make you feel stronger, instead of feeling like I can't do this if I don't have X, Y, Z person, right? So yes, there's a lot of self-awareness, there's a lot of kind of self-regulation and building what we call emotional efficacy, which is basically skills and coping abilities, where if something's upsetting us, I know what to do about it without needing to run to my spouse every single time for them to calm me down, for them to make me feel safe, for them to kind of remind me how I can cope with it. So becoming a little more independent with things, and then broadening our horizon. Now, this is where I think mental health can pose a challenge, because for a lot of people there is shame associated, or there are extra layers of fears associated. That this one person has accepted me, but perhaps my friends will not, they won't get it, or they leave. So that's more difficult, but equally, if not more important, for you to widen that social support circle and include your family if you can, but definitely your friends. So I think the principles are the same, but the roadblocks to it could look a little bit different for someone with mental health. Do you agree, Eugene? Am I missing something in that?
Totally agree. Yeah, spot on.
Thanks very much, Mahima. Yeah, totally agree with what you shared. And I think that actually leads us quite nicely to one of the questions in the Q&A box, which is that I'm curious to know what are some ways you could move towards a more secure attachment style. And I think you did answer part of that in your question in your answer to the previous question, but stuff like growing in independence, growing in emotional efficacy. But could you share maybe, I guess, a few practical tips in which we can maybe move from either insecure, avoidant, ambivalent to a more secure attachment style?
So depending on kind of where you're at in your journey, this might be a little challenging to do just by yourself. Simply because, as you guys know, it's very difficult to even identify what's going on. So having this other person helping hold up the mirror, helping you identify the patterns, all of that really helps. So therapy might play a huge role, but some of the things that we'd be looking at within therapy would involve everything from working through some of your core experiences which have led you to feel insecure perhaps, or scared or avoidant in the first place. So letting go of some of that past baggage and unlearning some of the negative cycles. That's going to be one part of therapy. Another part is going to be really building your self-esteem and your self-worth. And I think that's really the most important bit. building your sense of self, building your sense of identity, really equipping ourselves with skills and strategies and healthy coping mechanisms. And this is a huge kind of undertaking in and of itself. And once we have a stronger sense of who we are and what we can do, kind of reevaluating our relationships, what's working, what's not working, identifying healthy relationships from toxic relationships, identifying your boundaries, that what's okay and what's not okay, identifying your own values, identifying your own needs, learning how to communicate them in a way that's actually helpful. Yeah. So all of these are elements of forming a secure relationship. And yes, ultimately you have to do the work, but I would really recommend getting support in that process, because it's not always easy for us to be able to see things objectively, because this is so emotional. This like touches our very core and our very basic sense of self.
I think that's very beautiful what you shared about how it's very important for us to build our own sense of self, and understanding that our self-worth doesn't come from our partner, doesn't come from our relationships, doesn't come from our work or anything else that is out of our control, right? But really building that intrinsic sense of self-worth. And Eugene spoke about that really very beautifully, about how that also plays out in his relationship, which is when he has his own life, he goes out with his friends. That also helps his relationship. If he wants to play a game, then he just plays his game, and his partner is actually very, very appreciative of that as well. And yeah, I think about building up that independence, and reducing that codependence on the person, whether it's the person you're dating or whether it's any one of your friends. That's very important. And the last thing is also, I guess, being very vigilant and being very
Diligent.
Yes, diligent with your own therapy and with your own, I guess, your own self-recovery, your treatment. That is very important for your partner as well, to see that you're putting in the work, and then your partner feels like they can, not worry about you as much because you've got this, and you're working on it and you're being proactive in managing this. I think Eugene, you spoke about that a lot, about how right?
Yeah, I think when I was going through a really, really down time, I think, and my therapist actually encouraged me to look into my values, and mine was contribution and growth. And at that point in time, I realized I was looking too much into the relationship and not focus on my actual values, which is to grow as an individual, to contribute to like society, life, and people in general. So to see things improve. And I was thinking, if I were to go down this path, it would be very individualistic. It might be selfish, but it turned out to be actually more productive than trying not to do it, because going through the process of doing that, gaining happiness, gaining confidence, and then that manifests into the relationship itself. So it might be easy to think like, oh, I'm working on myself. I might be maybe growing out of the relationship, but it's not. Actually, you're actually building towards the relationship and contributing to it too. So I think that's something that I learned along the way. I hope to be able to share that.
Yeah, that's a very, very nice sentiment. Thanks, Eugene, for sharing that. Okay, moving on to something a little bit heavier. So there were two similar questions, but from the opposite ends of it. So someone asked, for someone like me who has been through 2 suicide attempts, do I share this with a prospective partner? I find this very scary and I don't want to hide the truth. And then another person is coming from the caregiver perspective, which is when a friend or a partner opens up about their suicidal thoughts, how can we support them? What do they need from us? And how can we communicate to them that we're ready to hold space for them to open up? Mahima, can you shed some light on this topic of suicide thoughts in a relationship?
So kind of for the person who's had attempts before, I completely understand how scary it must be. But if this is something that's a bit recurrent, that wasn't, like, okay, there was this one time 20 years ago in my life where this happened and it's never ever come up again, right? And either ways, at some point in your relationship, I would think it would be necessary for you to share that with your partner in a way that feels safe and comfortable. Like, put yourself in their shoes. If you were on the other side, would you want to and need to know about this? For both reasons. One is that they need to be willing and able to support you with that, if at all it comes up again. And secondly, not needing to hide it forever with a sense of fear and shame, because that's something that really weighs heavy on your relationship. So kind of this almost ties back into your earlier question of whether it is kind of take it or leave it. This is who I am. So yes, this is very sensitive information. So at what stage is something that you need to assess? But is this something that you need to share with your partner? I think so. Yeah. Now for the other bit of, if someone, whether that's your partner, a friend, or whoever shares suicidal thoughts, what do you do? Now that's again a whole different crash course to it. But one basic thing is first to believe them. Okay, don't try to tell them that, don't try to minimize it or dismiss it or tell them that they are being dramatic or making a big deal out of it or any of that. So just kind of that, okay, tell me more, get more information out of them. So what we do is basically something called a risk assessment, that we are trying to assess just how much in danger are you right now. Because a lot of people, so suicidal thoughts are very, very common. Most people have thought of it in some way at some point in their life. Doesn't mean that they're in danger. So we need to try to see how much in danger are they. Things like, okay, how bad does it feel right now? Do you think they'll act on something at this moment? Have they actually already made plans? Have they actually already brought pills? You know, where are they right now? Are they alone? Are they with family? So try to get a sense of just how imminent that risk is versus, you know, it's been really, really shitty these days. And sometimes I think, you know, it'll just be easier to fly forward. So that's different versus I am sitting on my window ledge, right? So you kind of need to get a sense of where they are at, then try to meet them. So one thing we do prefer as far as possible is for this person to not be alone. So ask them, is it okay if I come and hang out? You know, if they don't want you in their face, at least in the same house, or in, you know, do different things in the same room, but basically not leave them alone and ask them, what do you need? What will be helpful? Do you want to talk? Do you want me to just be physically present? Do you want me to call the ambulance? You know, if they already have a therapist, do you want me to try to connect with them? If they already have a therapist, the likelihood is that they have something called a safety plan. Ask them about it, right? What's your safety plan? Because that will have steps lined out for you, 1, 2, 3. So you just follow that. If you don't already have that, you ask that, should I connect you with a doctor right now? If they are in a state where they're just not being able to think and they're scattered, then you just go there, you try to hold them, you try to calm them down till you're able to talk to them about it and see what needs to be done about it. Because it will depend on where they are at, whether this is something more passive and passing by in the background versus, you know, I'm about to do something now. If anybody is about to do something now, call emergency services. Don't keep it only on you to rescue and save the person. Get help.
Thanks, Mahima. Yeah, you touched on the fact that, you know, people who have a history of suicidal thoughts and have been treated for suicidal thoughts usually would have this thing called safety plan. And for those in the audience who don't know what a safety plan is, it's basically certain things that you write out that you will activate in the event that your suicidal thoughts become very, very intense. And sharing this particular safety plan with, say, 1 or 2 of your very closest friends or the person that you're dating actually helps that person understand what they need to do in that event. And I think what you shared, Mahima, is very, very useful, which is that especially people with suicidal ideation, suicidal thoughts, there is that shame, there's also that guilt, and there is also that fear of, I guess, disclosing this to someone and sharing this with someone, that it wouldn't be believed, like that person won't believe you. And what you mentioned about believing that person and validating that person and just holding space for that person and asking, how can I be there? How would you like me to support you through this is just so important, and that really makes a world of difference. And then also whatever you shared about how it is important as a person who has this information now about this person, then to be able to, I guess, assess the situation and see whether this is an acute situation, or is it just a situation that is a bad day and this person's going to be able to get over it, or whether this person is really in a very, very bad state. And then it also then becomes I guess the best thing for you to do in that situation would then to activate professional help, right? So I think that was very, very helpful. Maybe we have time for one or two last questions. And Eugene, I wanted to go to you. So there's someone who said, I have 2 bad experiences in sharing my problems. At first, they were welcoming and so accepting. But when we were in an argument one time, they used my problems against me. And it was a big blow to me mentally. And it has been very hard for me to trust people again with my issues. How am I able to open up ever again and to feel emotionally safe again? So Eugene, maybe can you share whether you've had any bad experience of disclosing your mental health with, whether it's a friend or someone that you are dating, and where the trust was broken, and how did you rebuild that after that?
I think definitely it's a very interesting situation, because sometimes they might just come in with the bias that they might bring in that knowledge. It might not be on purpose from their end as well, to be totally frank, because especially with my partner, sometimes they might just think, oh, that's because of what I know, based on the context, they might think that you're like that. But so I think really setting the boundaries moving forward will help in really reminding the other party that this has nothing to do with it, and to really focus on the situation and not bring in other aspects. So really reminding them during the heat of the moment that it should be a separate thing. I think that really helps. I totally understand that feeling also, because I've been through that. But I think really setting the boundaries from the get-go really does help. So I think that's what I would usually suggest in situations like that.
Thank you. Thanks, Eugene. I think, when people share their experiences, then it is where we feel a lot less lonely. We realize that actually a lot of these things that people are experiencing are things that we've experienced as well. And Eugene, from your experience that you've lived through, you've actually been very, very helpful in, I guess, shedding light to how we can approach different scenarios in dating and in relationships. So thanks very much for that. Yeah, Mahima, maybe as we end or close this session, maybe you can share 2 pieces of advice. So one would be to a person with mental health condition that is looking to date, right? What would be your advice? And then the second one would be, what would be your advice to a caregiver who just found out that the person that they're dating has a mental health condition?
So I think for the person with the mental health condition, I would say, I think for both, the overall headline is take some time. So for the person with the mental health condition, take some time, get to understand yourself first, right? Get to know what works and doesn't work for you, what your needs are. Work on how you want to communicate this to your partner. Don't rush into it. Don't feel pressured into it. And be honest. There's no point hiding things, and there's no point, because that relationships are based on trust and respect and acceptance. So it's okay to take your time, and it's okay to think about it, but do it mindfully, do it intentionally, without shame. It's not your fault that you struggle with this. And just because you have this doesn't make you any less worthy of respect, of love, of care, of anything that anybody else deserves in a good relationship. But yes, extra challenges come for both, not just for you, but for your partner as well. So things like kindness, compassion, time, and acceptance, going back to my earlier message of give yourself time and give them time. And in terms of the receiver of that information, in addition to take some time, I would say be kind. You know, yes, it can perhaps be really scary for you. Maybe you have, so seen something on TV of how bad things can get, or maybe you've had a relative or a friend where things have gone really bad, and it might scare you. It might, depending on how things are communicated, you might feel betrayed, you might feel blindsided. So take some time with it, process it, and try to kind of put yourself in their shoes, read up, get educated about it, and then see if this is something that you feel is going to work for you. Because it's not necessary. Just like if we remove the mental health condition, not every person you date is going to be the person you end up living your life with. It's not necessary that just because a person has now shared that they have a mental health condition, that it has to work for you. It may not work for you, but take your time in figuring that out. And when you do communicate whatever it is, be kind.
Thanks very much, Mahima. Yeah, definitely kindness to the person that you're dating who has just revealed something so personal, something so vulnerable to you. And also kindness on yourself, right? Knowing that, now that this person has disclosed this to you, does this change everything? And is this something that you're still comfortable with? And realizing that you're not stuck in this relationship just because that person has shared this particular information with you, right? And I really like what you said about taking the time to understand. Mental health or mental health conditions actually manifest in people in different ways, right? It looks different with everybody, and it manifests in your relationships, in dating, in your interactions with people in very, very different ways. And preconceived notions are never helpful, and it's really useful for you to just take that time to understand the context and to understand how this is playing out in this other person's life and in your relationship as well. Maybe Eugene, we'll end off with you. If you had to say one thing to thank or appreciate your partner, since this is the week of Valentine's Day, maybe you can share one thing, if she's listening, that you appreciate about her.
Okay, yeah, she can probably hear me right now, I'm not sure. So I would like to thank her for really accepting who I am and what I have, and really sticking around when things got really difficult. And really, it might have been hard for her to accept it from the start, but like I'm really thankful that that has progressed and we are in a much better place now as compared to before. So really having the patience and really sticking around. And I think one thing I told her was that I deserve the space and time to really improve and get better as a person, and she accepted that. And that's something I'm really appreciative of.
Thank you. Thanks, Eugene. And thank you to everyone who has been listening. I know time was short and we weren't able to get to all the questions in the chat box, but we will figure out a way to try to answer them maybe over our socials, or we can also ask Mahima to help us out, and Eugene as well. We can get them to answer some of these questions in another way, and we'll try to figure out how we're going to address these. But thank you very much for all your questions. Thank you for your participation, and especially thank you to our wonderful panelists today. Mahima, thank you very much for sharing your professional experience, your stories from your clients, and really just the way that you have been. You've just been very kind and compassionate and very understanding towards the people who have been asking these questions as well. And we really feel your compassion for people with mental health, and thank you so much for what you're doing for the community here. And Eugene, thank you so much for sharing so vulnerably as well, your personal stories and everything that you've been through with your partner that has really helped, I guess, a lot of people here figure out their own way of interacting and disclosing their conditions to their partners as well. So really thank you to the both of you, and it has been a wonderful honor to be able to host this talk, and hopefully the audience went away with something good, some learnings. And thanks everyone, and we will now close the session. So, bye.
Thank you.